I haven't made a video in a super duper long time, and that's for a reason of many factors. The main one just being me taking time for myself and figuring out what works for me, and kind of retreating a little bit from socializing in general, unless it's people really close to me, and just pulling in to kind of check in with myself. And it's been really helpful for me to figure out ways to self-regulate and more analyze like what things do cause me to be less self-regulated. So I think my last series was more like me talking about attachment disorders, and specifically talking about the attachment disorder that I mostly relate with, and that being the fearful avoidant attachment disorder, or anxious avoidant, or disorganized. It's also called. Basically both the insecurities of the anxious attachment style and the avoidant attachment style. So I think that's the last thing that I talked about, and I did relate some of my personal experiences with that. And mostly for me it surrounds like that stuff kind of comes up a lot in relationship and in conflict relationships, in conflict in relationships. But one of the things that I've been thinking about recently, because of my personal situation and surrounding this particular attachment style, and something that I feel like maybe not particularly talked about, but I wanted to kind of talk about it. And there's kind of a theme that I've been circling around or struggling with in relationship to obligation. And I think just one of the things that I have kind of come to terms with, and one of the things that I feel like is part of the way that my brain processes things, is that some of the driving forces that were causing me to or driving me towards interactions in the past were kind of more based out of obligation, and or like consequences for not fulfilling an obligation. And I always had kind of like a resentment inside towards like feeling obligated to do a certain thing, and that like being like social obligation is a big one for me, but like feeling obligated to attend a certain thing or to do a certain thing for somebody, and it not coming from a sense of like generally me wanting to do that or go to that or do that action for the other person, but more based out of like a feeling that I had to, or there would be negative consequences. And it was kind of one of the reasons why I like pulled back a lot from a lot of social interactions. And I think for this fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment style, obligation and guilt are kind of like really closely tied together. And in order to feel really healthy and fulfilled, that it's necessary for us to like release ourselves from obligation. I think for everybody, actions that you do should come out of like a full heart, a full spirit. But particularly the consequences for somebody with a disorganized attachment, feeling a sense of obligation from somebody else can feel like you're giving up too much of yourself. And one of the things that fearful avoidant types struggle with is making lots of accommodations for other people, like over giving, over sharing for like self-worth, for like earning self-worth. So if somebody expects something from you, or you have this feeling of obligation to do something a certain way, it does really derail. You may do it, but also at the end, like after you do it, it's sort of like you kind of have this resentment towards this person that, or this, that expected this of you. And also then there's an internal beating yourself up for like giving too much. So there's like this outward and inward like judgment. So for me recently, I'm like still like kind of working to internalize this, to like incorporate this in my reality of that, like when I'm feeling that sense, the best thing I can do is work to release myself from it, release myself from that feeling of obligation. So right now I've been going through a situation where I'm renting a house from my parents, and like the initial assumption was that I would buy the house, and I still may buy the house, but for a little while I felt like this like obligation to buy the house, even if it wasn't like in my best interest, like for the long term. But I had this like internal feeling like if I don't do this, like there's going to be negative consequences, so like I have to do this. But then if I do this, I'm also going to feel like I was sort of like manipulated or forced or whatever. So there'd be like, I didn't stand up for myself, so judgment about myself. And I think that this is like kind of like a common experience for people with disorganized attachment. I'm just keeping an eye on my dog because he's running around the woods. I'm just getting him exercise. But, so anyways, I just like started realizing actually really recently that the way to like fix this is to like address it directly. Like sometimes the sense of obligation is like an assumption I had about what the other person would expect from me, and it's not really like a measure of reality. So like addressing these things head on and like having the conversation. I'm getting black flies in my eyes, so that's why I'm wiping my eyes. But having the conversation with the person that I'm feeling like an obligation to about me doing a certain activity has been really very beneficial. And as soon as I feel like the decision is up to me and that person doesn't expect a specific response from me, I'm able to then release myself from like kind of like stress and anxiety and focusing on that, and like actually move in a direction that feels like authentic to me, whether that be actually doing the thing that that person wants me to do or doing something different. It's like the actual act of that like being not expected of me becomes the way that I can release myself. So I don't know, it's just like kind of complicated because on one hand, there are people that just like have expectations from you, and that's coming from their own like internal beliefs on how people should be, and that maybe that you can't, or would have a very difficult time feeling freedom or being in that dynamic with a person like that, because there would be so much expectations that it's not even just the like what they want you to do, it's just even the fact that there is an expectation for the way that you would show up that is the problem. And then like on the other hand, like it's on us to really be communicating with the person's like, hey, it feels like I'm under a lot of pressure. Oh God, sorry. I'm under a lot of pressure to be this, that, or the other thing. Is that true? Or is there a way that you can like talk about this or release me from this particular expectation or obligation? And you know, I kind of think that like in the past I haven't been willing to have those conversations. Like I haven't been willing to, or brave enough, I'll say, because of like probably past consequences of like me enforcing myself, like in my what I desire, like, you know, in childhood or whatever, like having that be the assumption of how things are going to go versus actually like really having the conversation as to what the expectations or obligations are, and if there are actually expectations or obligations. And like even just having the conversation allows me to have some like context or like data points or whatever to be able to know how I would like to move forward with this. And in the story that I was like telling, like about the house and about the expectation that I would buy it, once I had the conversation, it became clear to me that I wasn't under any particular obligation, and it like really released me from like a lot of feelings of like sort of resentment and also self-judgment. And I just want to kind of like illuminate that that is like the experience of a fearful avoidant person. Like externally like fearing or resenting like people on the outside, but then at the same time feeling like internally beating themselves up for like giving up too much of themselves. And it's like completely freeing how one conversation can do that. And I know it sounds so simple. But like it's taken me 43 years to be able to have the courage to like essentially like grab the bull by its horns and like do this conversation thing in a way that I know like the outcome could be not what I want, but still the outcome is enough to allow me to have the freedom to make my own decisions. And like I don't know, I think I still struggle with it. I think I will always hesitate to have these difficult conversations. But yeah, so I've been thinking a lot about my experience with obligation, and like I think it's fairly generalizable, or at least like broadly generalizable, to people that kind of struggle with like both sides of the insecure attachment spectrum. So I don't know if this makes any sense or if it resonates with anybody. I just feel like I finally wanted to record something because it was a huge breakthrough for me, and maybe it's helpful. I don't know. Hope you're all having a good day. I decided to do some walk in nature to get my dog some exercise, but also it's like hugely important for me to recalibrate this way on my own. All right, have a great day. Bye.